Please sit down. We're ready to get going. Hi everybody, my name is Bruin. I'm the chair of Bruin Political Union. We had a quick switch in moderators. I will be moderating along with Chloe, who is a longtime member of our programming and outreach departments. Our second topic for the evening is wealth and equality. One of the most prominent topics on the 2020 trail has been wealth inequality. Perhaps the most visible indicator of this topic is homelessness.
So we're going to call to the stage the debaters from Bruin Democrats and Bruin Republicans. So from Bruin Republicans, Mr. Bruin. And from Bruin Democrats, Ms. Sarah Wing. Okay, so one of the most prominent topics on the 2020 trail has been wealth inequality. Perhaps the most visible indicator of this issue is homelessness. In 2018, homelessness rose by 16% in the city of Los Angeles. Sarah, your party holds supermajorities in both chambers in our state. Have Democratic policies, like combating homelessness in California, simply failed to combat the economic inequality within the state and the country?
I absolutely think that not enough has been done to actually combat homelessness. What has been going on is that we haven't been doing enough to address the issues that actually cause people to become homeless. We need to actually be looking at things that directly affect the people who are most likely to become homeless. For example, we need to be actually having more help directly to them. We need to have more comprehensive health care. We need to have things that don't cause people to go bankrupt and then become homeless. Because the number one cause of bankruptcy in this country is an unexpected medical bill. The average family can't afford more than $400 in unexpected expenses, so absolutely we need to actually be targeting the systemic issues that are leading to homelessness. And until we do that, no, we haven't done enough. I think that Democrats definitely can be doing more, and this has been a long time problem in our country, that we do need to be attacking the issue directly.
Do you have a response?
Well, I think the housing crisis in California has definitely been because of failure in regulation and policy on behalf of the Democrats. If we're going to talk about the unhoused, one of the things that we need to address is housing prices. And we can look at San Francisco as a case to observe and see that the average studio apartment in San Francisco costs $3,000. An average story building in San Francisco can't grow more than 3 stories tall without strict regulations and policies that need to be enacted, which most people don't even bother doing. There's burdensome zoning laws, there's failure in regulation and policy. If you look at Tokyo, for example, and see that when they had their housing crisis in the 1980s, when they had their housing crisis in the 1980s, they shifted the power to the federal government and removed almost all zoning laws and permitted anyone to build anything they want anywhere. And the free market dictated that housing was needed, and housing was provided. In a place where 20 million people live, you could buy a 1,000 square foot apartment for nearly $300,000 US. Can you do that in San Francisco? You can't.
Sarah, do you have a response?
No, like I said, I agree that the Democratic Party should have been doing more, but we do have more Democratic candidates in 2020 that are shifting the conversation that we are proud for. And like I said, there has been a failure in regulation, in housing policy, and we both agree that the average cost of housing is skyrocketing, it's way too high. We will be doing more, and I have confidence that the Democrats can do more because we will be Trump in 2020.
Well, I'm glad that we agree on something, but the only thing that I'm having difficulties with is when Democrats propose policies like rent control. When 90% of all mainstream economists prove that rent control simply doesn't work. Economists from Milton Friedman, who's a Nobel Prize winning economist, You have several articles that are written. When you impose rent control on society, you see that there's actually a shortage in housing, there's a lower quality of housing that's available, and you decrease the total economic surplus that's available within that society.
Okay. Your next question, President Trump has floated the idea of rounding up homelessness or the homeless people in this country and sending them to vacant federal facilities to get them treatment, meet their basic needs. Is that effective? And if not, what could President Trump do to help those that are financially struggling?
Well, if we take a step back and just look at it objectively, we can see that the majority of homeless people within this country have a mental illness. We can see that in the 1980s, when mental asylums were available for people who had mental illnesses to stay, where they weren't just left on the streets or in our prison systems, we saw that homelessness was actually not that big of a problem. And once those asylums were actually deinstitutionalized and shifted to the local government, in which they didn't have enough funding, in which they just couldn't properly manage their money and the asylums were actually closed, you saw that these patients of mental illness in these asylums were released into the streets and they flooded the prison systems. If you want to be a warden today in our prison system, you must have a psychiatric background in some case, since there's such a large proportion of prisoners which have a mental illness. I think his statement might sound brash at first, but if we just look back and look at what he actually meant, which was, let's take all the people of a mental illness within our communities who are living on the streets and put them in federal facilities where they can actually be taken care of, I think that's a solution that we can all agree on.
Sarah, do you have a response to that?
I do think that we need to address homelessness. Obviously, we've agreed on this. The thing is, I don't see President Trump really doing anything. I can see that is tangible. When I see the tangibles, I will praise President Trump for what he's been doing. But he's been in office for almost 4 years. He hasn't helped alleviate the problem. He's let what's been going on continue, basically, and rent control and everything going on. I do think Democrats can be doing more. We've agreed on this, and I will applaud any measure that is taken towards that when it actually occurs.
Well, rent control is actually a state issue, and the state imposes it, not Trump can do anything.
We're going to move on to the next question. Sarah, this one's for you. Several Democratic presidential candidates have proposed making college free for everyone. However, Mayor Pete Buttigieg believes that college should not be free for the wealthy and people who can afford it. Should programs meant to curb inequality be available to everyone or only the underprivileged?
I think that programs should be given to everyone. So I do disagree with Mayor Pete Buttigieg on that. The whole thing is that when people give and they actually pay into a system, everybody is supposed to benefit. We shouldn't be excluding the people at the top. I agree with the other Democratic candidates. I unfortunately do not agree with Mayor Pete on this. I think that if you do contribute into the system, there is more fluidity of there's going to be more fluidity of revenue going on because people can actually afford to do other things, and when everyone can actually contribute, then that's going to benefit everyone at the end. So I do not think that people should be excluded at the top.
A follow-up for Vikram. Does making college free help decrease wealth inequality?
One thing that I can't understand is that why are we using income or wealth inequality as an indicator to measure how well a society is doing within our society? If we look at reform.org, and which measures the economic and financial and monetary systems all over the globe, I can give you a list of countries that have a lower income inequality rate than the United States, which is Kenya, Iran, Thailand, Vietnam, which I can pretty much assure that none of us here would say that those countries have a higher standard of living than the United States. Instead of looking at just one metric and trying to reduce one specific metric, we need to look at the standard of living, GDP growth, wage growth, and use that as puzzle pieces to get the clear image.
Sarah, do you have a response?
No, I do agree that we need to be looking at the whole image. I really hope that there's going to be even more questions about the standard of living, about all of that, because we do need to talk about this whole inclusive idea of everything does contribute to how well people are doing in our society.
Okay, Sarah, former presidential contender Andrew Yang pitched a freedom dividend, $1,000 a month for every American. Will the universal basic income lift a much-needed burden off of America's shoulders, or will it be a handout that will stifle American creativity?
I do not think that it's actually going to be addressing wealth inequality in the United States. Universal basic income is but one treatment to a symptom of wealth inequality. We need to be looking at the picture as a whole. Giving $1,000 a month to different people means different things. In some cases, sure, it's worked. In others, it hasn't. If we were to implement UBI, we need to have more things that go along with it. Whether that's a more progressive tax system, more comprehensive Medicare for all, that's also important to consider because UBI alone will not get the job. You're throwing money to try to solve a problem when in reality, like I said earlier, medical care bills, all of these are what contributes to wealth inequality, and only throwing money at people will not solve the issue.
Do you have a follow-up to that, Vikram?
I think we can agree on this issue. If we look at the history of universal basic income and look at Ontario or Norway, we can see that it didn't work and it was actually repealed because it shown that it destroyed the incentive for people to be as productive as they were. The only good that would come under universal basic income would be under the supposition that there's an underlying group of people that are just simply unemployable because of technological advancements, or because of technological advancements, cost of production have grown to nearly zero.
So we have a couple of audience questions now on this topic. This first one is for Vikram. It comes from Savi. The question is, the president touts his economic record by citing the stock market and the unemployment rate, but homelessness has risen since he first took office. To what extent is homelessness important when evaluating the health of the economy for Republicans?
I think it is an important factor for us to consider, but again, we're missing the issue that homelessness isn't caused because of lack of jobs or lack of financial means, but it's mostly caused of mental illnesses. The majority of people on the streets are because they have a mental illness. And you can't make a financial argument to say that we are not doing enough to provide these people. Again, I think I mentioned in the first part where we need mental asylums for these people to be housed.
So Vikram, you're claiming that homelessness is solely a problem of mental illness and is unrelated to the economy.
Considering that almost 80% of people on the streets have a mental illness and that there's millions of jobs that are currently unfilled, yes.
Sarah, would you like to respond to that?
Absolutely. I do not think that the idea of throwing people into a mental asylum is anything at all that you should be talking about. When you talk about homelessness not occurring from financial well-being, it's inaccurate. How well people are doing because of how much money they have, their ability to cover medical bills, all of these things directly contributes to whether or not they're going to be on the streets. And we really need to be looking into the fact that because people who are homeless can't afford like medical care, for example, the cost of covering this from the government actually skyrockets. It would even make more sense in an instance, just give free housing because that would be less expensive than just paying because these homeless people are going to end up in hospitals, unfortunately, because they can't cover their medical bills, and it would go over to the government to cover this.
So we have another audience question. This one's for Sarah. It comes from Shahmat. Here's the question. Concentrated wealth has been shown to significantly reduce consumer spending since the ultra-wealthy simply can't spend all of their wealth, slowing the economy. A more progressive tax system to redistribute wealth to those more likely to inject it in the economy. Would you support a progressive tax, such as the wealth tax, that might help boost consumer spending?
I would absolutely support a wealth tax. I think it's necessary, I think it's constitutional, and that we need to actually be looking at the fact that there is an absolute lack of voluntary investment going on from the ultra-rich, and this even emphasizes the failure that Trump has been in actually providing for people at the bottom of the ladder. He's given his whole tax cut, his whole tax reform plan back in 2017, but since then we've seen no actual evidence that many companies have reinvested into our society. Only 4% of S&P 500 companies increased worker wages as a result of Trump's tax cuts. The National Association for Business Economics even released a poll of economists employed by major firms in corporate America saying that 84% reported that In the years since the passage of Trump's tax reform plan, there have been no changes in their reinvestment or even their hiring plans. So absolutely, it's necessary for there to be a wealth tax because corporations are not shifting their wealth. They're not willing to actually reinvest in the economy. They've been doing nothing for people at the bottom of the ladder, and that needs to change.
Thank you. Vikram, do you have a response to the idea of a wealth
Yes,
tax?
I do. We can look at countries that have already imposed a similar wealth tax that currently Bernie and Warren are proposing. If you look at France simply and see that during their recent tax policies by the Macron administration, France is experiencing a loss of 10,000 millionaires per year. This is according to CNN. It's had the opposite of effect of what Sanders and Warren have been proposing, which is the wealth tax. And we see that instead of taxing billionaires at what they're at right now, we'll get 0% if we increase it to Bernie Sanders' 97%. And to her remarks that the economy isn't doing well, or the fact that lower class people aren't actually making as much, the median household income in the first 2 years of President Trump's presidency has grown by nearly $2,000. And just for comparison, under Obama's 8 years as president, the median household income only grew by $1,100, and this is according to factcheck.org. The pay for the bottom 25% of wage earners rose by 4.5% in November of 2019 from last year. This is according to the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. And the Wall Street Journal reported that the wages for the top 25% of wage earners in the United States actually grew by 2.9%. We've added 7 million new jobs to this economy. We saw the largest reduction of people on food stamps, and the lowest unemployment rate in almost nearly half a century.
Okay, our next question is for Bruin Republicans. President Trump signed the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act on December 22nd, 2017. It cut individual income tax rates, doubled the standard deduction, and eliminated personal exemptions from the tax code. Why does this help eliminate wealth inequality in the United States?
Well, President Trump's Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was a bundle of a lot of things that he proposed, one of which was also decreasing the corporate tax rate from 35% to 21%, also passing opportunity zones, which helped a lot of people in impoverished areas who were mainly concentrated with minorities get even a lower tax rate than any other place. And the reason why these tax rates were necessary was that if you compare us to the rest of the world, the United States actually had the highest corporate tax rate out of any other Western developed nation. We were nearly 15% above the average corporate tax rate. And this is according to the Economic Cooperation and Development in the US. We've seen that since President Trump enacted his tax reform, again, back to my previous point, that we've nearly added 7 million jobs. Poverty rate decreased by 1 whole basis point, lowest unemployment rate in half a century, and we've had record low unemployment rates for African Americans, Hispanics, and women. Opportunity zones has helped a lot of people in impoverished areas gain the economic mobility that they needed to climb up the economic ladder. It's helped incentivize long-term investments in low-income communities across the country, and these incentives offer capital gains tax relief to investors for new investments designed in opportunity zones. The same capital gains that Warren and Bernie both want to increase.
Sarah, do you have a response?
I do. So, I find it hilarious when the Republican Party wants to take credit for what Obama did with his post-recession stimulus package. You want to talk about how amazing a rise in jobs there is for the economy, that there's less African-American unemployment and all of these things. The reason why this happened was because of Obama's stimulus package. You want to say that the U.S. had the highest tax rate, but it was necessary. We have a pure concentration of so many corporations in America. It would be ridiculous to not have a tax rate high enough to hold these corporations accountable because of the concentration. And when it comes to Obama's sterling record of extracting us out of a recession caused by a Republican boom and bust cycle of supply-side delusion, facts don't care about your feelings. The stimulus could have done more, yes. We could see even higher numbers from Obama than under Trump. We couldn't see that because unfortunately Obama had to leave office, but Trump is claiming all the credit for everything that Obama did. Obama prevented a second recession that could have turned into a depression. He created an average of 1.6 million jobs a year and prevented an increase in poverty. He provided $200 billion.
We're going to move on to closing statements. Bruin Republicans will begin.
It's funny when she talks about Obama taking credit for what Trump has actually done, considering that Obama, after he came into presidency, the recession was nearly over and the economy was entering into an expansion. So no matter what Obama would have done, the country would have expanded either way. And economists have actually criticized Obama for taking credit for the slowest expansion to ever occur after any recession. Over 200 tax hikes that occurred. And why is it that since President Trump came under presidency and released his tax reform act, that 500 companies have came out and said that we are increasing our wages, we are increasing our productivity, and we're increasing our bonuses that we give out to our employees. We've seen the stock market grow at a rate that's nearly exponential compared to Obama's, considering his came straight out of a recession and President Trump took office during the late end of a business cycle.
Sarah, your closing statement?
Obama did so much for our country with the post-recession stimulus package. You want to talk about that there's been the slowest growth in a recession? Yes, it took a while, but everything that he did was necessary, and his whole stimulus package was comprehensive. It took a long time, but it got a lot of things done. I provided you with all of the statistics. He provided $200 billion in individual tax cuts, aimed at the lowest one on the ladder. He actually cared about the people at the bottom and realized that there needs to be a reinvestment of wealth. And you love to brag about how the stock market has been growing. Republicans love to brag about this. But if we look at the Dow Jones, it's simply the top 30 corporations in America betting on their own success. It's absolutely ludicrous to say that the economy is doing well just because the top 30 corporations in America is doing well. Look at the workers. How are they doing? Unless you can tell me that they're doing amazing the way that the top 30 corporations is doing because they're leeching off of workers who are working for low wages, you can't tell me that the economy is doing well.
Thank you so much, debaters. We're going to take a 2-minute intermission and then we'll get going with the final topic, U.S.-Iran relations. Thank you.
Can you check Facebook to make sure it's still working? Can you just check our Facebook page? Yeah.
Hello, everybody. We're going to be settling down now, please. Bit of quiet.
What about it?
Welcome back, everybody. Our final topic for tonight is the state of affairs between the United States and Iran. A few weeks ago, President Trump ordered the killing of one of Iran's top generals, Qasem Soleimani, and this renewed fears in the United States about the potential threat of a Middle East war. We're going to be looking at how the United States should be navigating these testy waters. But right now, I'd like to welcome to the stage Miss Michelle Ohanian for Bruin Republicans and Mr. Bruno for Bruin Democrats. Okay, just a reminder to our audience tonight, if you have questions that you would like us to ask any of the debaters, please submit them and we will ask them for you.
How do you submit them?
I believe they're on the Facebook page. Nav is the one who's handling all of the questions. They're all on the Facebook page right now.
Your Facebook page, you just message it the Facebook page. You can also put them in the description of Blue Cross Project. The easiest way is with locally union message center.
So the first question tonight is from Michelle. Last month, the United States killed Iranian General Qasem Soleimani, often considered one of the top figures underneath the Ayatollah in the Iranian leadership structure. Do you think his killing was justified and necessary?
So regarding the killing of Qasem Soleimani, there were definitely risks that took place when we had to, when the strike was goaded by Trump on Soleimani. But the case is this: he was a military actor that backed a strong network of militias in the Middle East region. So this essentially makes the Iranian regime look good. It allows this regime to claim victories abroad without having to deal with any conflict on their own borders. So what killing Soleimani did is essentially they got rid of one of the top generals that constantly acts against U.S. interests and acts against peace in the nation, because he was Shia-backed, and considering all of the neighbors of Iran are Sunni governments, that they would be threatened by someone like Soleimani.
A response, Sanjay?
Okay. To begin, the killing of Qasem Soleimani was a pathetic attempt of wagging the dog by Donald Trump. There was no imminent threat of Soleimani attacking the United States in any way, shape, or form. Rand Paul and Mike Lee, two incredibly pro-Trump congressmen, said they felt intellectually insulted after leaving a briefing with him about the threat of Soleimani. Additionally, the last time that a major war general of a status such as Soleimani's was killed was in World War II, and it happened against the Japanese. There was no reason for us to kill Soleimani in this instance, and it was actually quite ridiculous that we were even trying to justify it.
Can I come back on that?
We're only doing one follow-up per question. This next question is for Sanjay. What would you say to Arab leaders in the Middle East, particularly of Sunni countries, who are asking the U.S. for greater involvement in order to combat Iran? More broadly, what is the balance between intervention and restraint in the Middle East for the United States?
I mean, in terms of intervention, I think that obviously the United States should always try and go for diplomatic approaches first. And also, I think that in terms of like Iran, we have the ability to go for diplomatic, well, we no longer have the ability to go for diplomatic approaches as we have shattered the JCPOA when Trump raised sanctions. So I think actually the current position the United States is in right now is a direct result of our own poor actions, and I don't think that we need to take any more military intervention or anything that would hurt the area more.
Thank you. Michelle, do you have a response?
Okay, so the notion that the JCPOA was even remotely able to curb Iran's ambitions in the Middle East and in developing nuclear weapons is ridiculous. Because, first of all, there's a sunset clause, considering that this deal expires, which would expire in 2025, which is in a few short years. And the other thing that the JCPOA actually does is it rents Iranian arms control for a limited period of time, and it relieves sanctions on their economy, allowing them to become more successful, get more money so they could fund some of their other activities abroad, which, yes, includes terrorism. And the JCPOA also was ineffective when it came to inspections. So the JCPOA did not require Iran to submit to anytime, anywhere inspections by the International Atomic Energy Agency. And Iran has been proven to be a serial cheater on its nuclear and other international obligations. So this would delay inspections of such facilities for up to 24 days. And during that time period, this basically allows Iran to get rid of any evidence that it had and lie to the United States and other countries that signed the deal that they would be curbing
Michelle,
nuclear operations.
Follow-up question. We'll start with Michelle on this one. Beyond the JCPOA, how should the United States go about decreasing tensions with Iran both now and in the future?
I think Trump's approach to Iran is actually the best approach that you can take because he represents strength as a deterrent. So what he's essentially doing is he's behaving in a strong manner to let Iran know that their actions and their violence in the Middle East will not be tolerated anymore. The JCPOA, as being proposed by my opponent, was basically international appeasement by the United States and by countries abroad that basically allowed Iran to go rogue and basically engage in all these activities abroad, which includes backing militias that killed thousands of people, including many Muslims in Yemen, Lebanon, Iraq, and so on and so forth. So that's my response.
Thank you. Sanjay?
I think in regards to the idea that Donald Trump's strength is what we need in regards to Iran is not true, because Iran has much higher resolve for actually achieving nuclear weapons than we really give them credit for. So, although Trump has increased sanctions, which is a strong approach, sanctions do not actually do anything to a country that has a full-on dictatorship where one person is in command. There is no way for any organic approach to take effect, organic democratic approach to take effect, because there is the people have no power. So in sanctions, the people on top have the ability to just divert the flow of money towards their interests, regardless of how it affects the people on the bottom. So all that is really happening here is that Iran's money is now going only towards nuclear ambitions and their own interests that the people on top care about. It has nothing, the citizens of Iran are still suffering, and all this does is breed anti-United States sentiment.
Thank you. Sanjay, European leaders and critics of President Trump have criticized pulling out of the Iran nuclear deal, saying that it decreases stability in the region and hurts chances of forming better diplomatic relations with Iran. Do you think pulling out of the deal decreased U.S. credibility with our allies, and how does it further U.S. interests?
Absolutely. I think that in every single way, shape, and form, it did decrease U.S. credibility with our allies. I think that it was an extremely poor decision, and that it doesn't help. In terms of Europeans, they now no longer see us as they can't see stability in us. They don't see that we have the ability to make an agreement and hold to it. Especially as the Europeans were still trying to get this nuclear deal to work. They organized like a $13 billion pipeline with Iran, an oil pipeline, in order to get them to stay with the deal. And even after we increased sanctions, then Iran decided they did not want to be part of it. We have essentially ruined Europeans in negotiations with Iran twice. First, the first time, we left the JCPOA, and now after raising sanctions, there is absolutely no hope of any negotiations working.
Thank you. And if the debaters could hold the microphones a little bit closer to their mouths. Do you have a response?
Yes, I do. So the notion that this somehow decreases our status with our allies is preposterous, because in a meeting between Macron and Donald Trump, Macron admitted that he believed that the Iran deal was ineffective and it was flawed In any case, the Europeans and our allies, especially in Israel and the Middle East, would see us as heroes who had pulled us out of this failed deal. And according to the Israeli heist, the photographs that Israelis took from Iran's nuclear archive proved that they were already developing nuclear weapons. And after all this evidence was given to a nuclear engineer, he stated that, yes, this is clear evidence that they're planning on developing a nuclear weapon. And this nuclear engineer's name was Robert Kelly, and he was working for the IAEA. So it proved that basically the deal was nonsensical because it wasn't even doing what it was set out to do. It wasn't curbing Iran's nuclear program because they were doing it behind our back.
Thank you, Michelle. This next question, we're going to start with the Republicans for this one. The Iranian citizenry has engaged in on and off protests against the regime for years. The regime has consistently responded with force, killing thousands of their own people. In the meantime, the U.S. has imposed sanctions on Iran for its behavior abroad as well as its nuclear program. Do you think U.S. sanctions are worth the pressure they place on the Iranian people and the consequences they have in terms of inflation, cost of living, and being a citizen in Iran?
I think these are definitely very unfortunate sanctions for the Iranian people because they obviously have to deal with all the economic setbacks. However, in his press conference, Trump said that he was on the Iranian people's side. He said that if all the people who love freedom, love democracy, and are standing up against their government, as they did when they protested the strike that Iran accidentally took down a Ukrainian airliner, they protested against that. They protest against this regime. And Trump's saying that he sides with them. So, the sanctions are the only way that we can put pressure on the Iranian regime because other than we are not in a war with Iran. So the only thing we can do is encourage ourselves and our allies to put pressure on Iran financially so that they do something about mistreating their civilians and trying to further nuclearize the Middle East.
Thank you. Sanjay, do you have a response?
Increasing sanctions and saying that you support the Iranian people are two extremely contradictory actions, as sanctions do nothing but affect the actual people who are living in Iran and not the regime. The sanctions, it's the same thing that happens in countries like North Korea, where people like Kim Jong-un live their lives normally and the people who actually have to support the country are suffering. Sanctions do not affect leaders, they only affect citizens. So if we were to increase sanctions, it would do nothing for the people who Donald Trump says he's behind. Additionally, you said that we are not at war with Iran, and we are only narrowly not at war with Iran, as we just killed one of their leading officials.
Thank you. We have one last prepared question before we move to the audience. We'll start with Sanjay on this one. Do you believe the U.S. should seek regime change or increase pressure to cause regime change in Iran? Why or why not?
I do think that a regime change would be beneficial to Iran. However, I think it would have to happen organically. I don't think the U.S. should force pressure onto Iran in order to bring about a regime change. And I don't think that sanctions or any sort of military involvement is going to bring about a beneficial regime change. You can always have a regime change. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be good for the country or the people. So personally, I think we should enact more diplomatic relations. And even though we are worried about Iran no longer following the JCPOA or nuclear agreements, there is still a year until they reach full nuclear capabilities in which we can pursue diplomatic relations.
Thank you, Michelle. Do you have a response?
Yeah, so I would like to point out that you just said that because it's a dictatorship, that it cannot happen organically. So sanctions is the only option that we really have, unless we want to go into a regime change wars, which the Democrats constantly berate Republicans on ever attempting on doing. And I agree that a regime change war is not the way to go with this thing, because Trump has made promises that he, on the campaign trail, that he does not want endless wars in the Middle East and abroad. So he made promises to bring his soldiers back home, and I think he's made some efforts to honor that, although facing pressure from some of his cabinet members. So the notion that there is nothing that we can do, but that's false. There is a lot that we can do. We can be strong, and that can act as a deterrent. And how this proved that this has made America look strong and Iran look weak is essentially the Iran's the Iranian people told Iraqis before they attacked our base so we could evacuate, and they wouldn't dare kill any American in the process. So their 22 missiles that went off after Soleimani's death took no U.S. casualties. And after they shot the commercial airline, they tried to hide it for 3 full days. All this shows is international weakness.
Thank you. We are now going to move to audience questions. Audience members, once again, if you have questions that you are thinking of, please submit them to the BPU Facebook page. We're going to start with Dakota. And we can go first with Michelle on this one. How do you feel the potential consequences of waging war with Iran will affect the U.S. economy, especially considering that 29% of our oil is imported through OPEC, which Iran is a part of?
I don't think that the U.S. is going to go to a war with Iran directly because, as Ronald Reagan so cleverly put it, that the Iranians are not that stupid.
The basis of the question, though, is that I'm just restating the question, is that the U.S. and Iran are already at war.
But they are currently, if it were to be a war, all this like media attention that it's going to be World War III is absolute nonsense. It's going to be a regional war, if that, and the Iranians haven't provoked anything after the killing of Soleimani because they haven't, there hasn't proved to be any significant U.S. casualties. So if there were to be a war between the United States and Iran, I'm telling you that there's not going to be because the Iranians do not have the military that it takes to withstand any pressure from the United States, and also we have allies in the Middle East such as Israel. So Israel working with the United States together, it would be no problem to take on Iran in a war, and I'm not saying that would ever happen because, again, like I stated, Ronald Reagan said Iranians would never go to war with us because they're not that stupid.
Thank you. Sanjay, do you have a response?
Okay. Additionally, saying the fact that since there were no American casualties, that means that there were no negative impacts to the strike and to any moves against Iran we made so far. There were 109 U.S. troops have suffered from traumatic brain injury, which, although Donald Trump has said, I heard that they had headaches, and I don't consider them very serious injuries relative to other injuries I have seen. They are serious injuries, as this is our military personnel, and there are people who put their lives on the line to protect our country. Additionally, you had stated that Donald Trump made promises to bring people back home, but he deployed 3,000 more troops in the Middle East after killing Soleimani. So I don't think that this decision is necessarily one that wouldn't bring about any sort of war, because there are still people being impacted even if there isn't directly a war.
So we have another audience question. This one is for Sanjay from Casey. Which candidate is best suited to mend U.S.-Iran relations?
Donald Trump.
Please respect the speaker's right to time.
Yeah, honestly, personally, well, I'll just divert this, I'm a decently big fan of Bernie because I believe, he has a lot of good policies.
What is he going to do about Iran? That was the question.
So Michelle, we're not going to do back and forth, but you can have your response.
Donald Trump.
All right, we're going to move into one last audience question. This is from Michael. We're going to start with Michelle. So what, if anything, has the United States gained from our decades-long military involvement in the Middle East? And do these gains outweigh the financial and life costs that have been incurred?
So the gains of interacting in situations like this is obviously nuclear non-proliferation. So we do not want countries going rogue and thinking that they can develop nuclear programs. So in the international community, we have essentially agreed upon certain countries that already have nukes being able to keep their nukes, and that's what we want. We want nuclear non-proliferation. We want other countries to not use Iran as an example to thinking they could develop their own nuclear war program, because essentially what happened in India and Pakistan is that when India developed their nuclear weapons, Pakistan also developed nuclear weapons as a response to that. So we definitely do not want Iran to be an example, so that's why we are engaging in these activities in the Middle East. Trump definitely does not want to engage. He stated that he is something of an isolationist. He wants to stop endless wars, but unfortunately this is the fact of the matter, that we have to deal with these types of situations because there is a very clear and eminent problem between the Shia governments and the Sunni governments in the Middle East.
Sanjay, your response?
Speaking about the comparison to India and Pakistan, I think that's extremely incorrect, as in this situation, Iran would be the Pakistan, because in In the Middle East, Israel is one of the main countries who has nuclear capabilities, and there aren't many other countries who could compete or even hold their own against Israel. So I think the reason why Iran is constantly trying to get these weapons is because they're in this situation where they have no ability to. It's what makes countries desire for nuclear weapons is the ability to compete with other countries. And the thing is that like currently for Iran, their biggest adversary is Israel, as is the same with many other countries in the Middle East. So I don't think necessarily that us spending, I think that the amount of money we have put into military deployments versus diplomatic relations I think we should spend more time in terms of diplomacy than in terms of military relations.
Thank you. We're going to move into closing statements. So,
Am I allowed to come back on that?
I think you had the first response.
Okay.
So we're going to move into closing statements, and Sanjay can start.
Okay. The killing of Qasem Soleimani absolutely should not have happened. There was no risk or imminent threat to the United States of America or any of our civilians or military personnel at the time. Two pro-Trump congressmen said they were insulted by the fact that Trump had said that there was an imminent threat. Additionally, this decision was not made for the purpose of killing Qasem Soleimani. It was not made for the purpose of killing the second highest official in Iran. It was made in order to make Trump look good before an election and during an impeachment trial. This decision was made at Mar-a-Lago, where Kevin McCarthy and Matt Gaetz, who is a first-term senator, were both present, and neither Chuck Schumer or Nancy Pelosi, who are important members of our Congress, were informed. Although Trump is the commander-in-chief, our Congress should have been made aware of this decision, as this is an act of war. I do not think that this decision was made for any reason other than to make Trump look good or for the rallying effect.
Thank you. And Michelle?
To wrap up on Iran, the JCPOA was essentially ineffective. It did not achieve what it was set out to achieve. The evidence recovered by the Israelis proved that Iran was developing nuclear weapons. This Iran deal was essentially international appeasement. The effect was allowing the Iranian economy to thrive so that they can further fund their bad actions in the Middle East. It allowed bad actors like Soleimani and the Ayatollah to fund terrorist militias such as Hamas and Hezbollah. Trump was right to pull out. He was right to impose sanctions because this country, frankly, needs stronger leaders that deter rogue governments such as Iran and, yes, Soleimani.
Thank you so much, debaters. That wraps up our evening tonight. Just again, BPU was so happy to put on this debate with Bruin Republicans and Bruin Democrats. We have other programming throughout the year to increase civil conversation on campus with our diverse political communities. If you'd like to speak with a BPU board member, we will be around after the meeting. Thank you so much for coming.